Nolan Karras still lives in Roy, Utah, the community in which he grew up.
You know, my parents had a big influence on me. My father was a 8th grade educated man and worked at the flour mill, Pillsbury Flour Mill, for 38 years. Was also a volunteer fireman here in Roy, and we used to thrill to see if he made it to the station first, and if he was driving the big red truck, we'd stand outside and hope the siren was going as it went past our house.
Nolan attributes his early interest in politics to a teacher at Weber High School.
I had a Mr. Reed in Weber High that was very much into, he was teaching us history, but he was very much involved in the political process and spent a lot of time talking about it. And I look back at my interest now and think he piqued my interest as into politics and about government and how it worked and so forth. So I'd probably trace most of the influence that I've had back to my education in my days at school.
While a student, Nolan met his future wife, Linda.
Went to school with my lovely wife from junior high on through high school, but she didn't know I was alive. I could get in a lot of trouble right now by imitating her old boyfriend, but we've been married for 45 years, so I think she can handle it now.
Nolan enrolled at Weber State College and began studying business.
A very fine teacher named Bill Tillman. I don't know what's happened to him, but he was a fine finance teacher. Got up in class one day, probably my freshman year, and said, if any of you got a good grade point, you ought to go down and change your major to banking and finance, because that's where all the scholarships are. I went down that day and changed my major.
After graduating from Weber, Nolan went to the University of Utah to complete an MBA.
I met a fellow at a wedding, in all places, that was a CPA for Arthur Anderson. And he kept telling me with my grade point that I ought to be a CPA, and I thought that was the last thing I ever want to do. Consider that to be looking very boring work. I pictured green eye shades and garter belts on the sleeves. And he persuaded me enough that I started interviewing with the CPA firms and actually went to work for Arthur Anderson. Nolan
would eventually create the Karras Company, offering financial management and investment services.
A fellow by the name of Lowell Peterson was the representative for this district, and he wanted to run for the Senate. He wanted somebody to run in his place so he could be free to go run for the Senate. And he literally took me to the courthouse the last day of filing and got me to file. And so I announced to everybody that I was going to run for one term. And really, when I got through the first term, I said, I'm done. I'm going to go back to my life. Somebody else can run. And I got persuaded to go back. And
Nolan served in the legislature for 10 years, including time spent as Speaker of the House.
Yeah, I was Speaker of the House when we named it Weber State University. And I probably should feel very guilty now that I'm a regent, but Rolf Kerr was the commissioner. And we kept calling Rolf in and saying, Rolf, we want to name Weber State a university. And he'd say, well, the regents haven't, got to that point yet. And we'd say, well, why don't you go back and talk to them? And we voted for it. They finally voted like 9-8 or something to approve it. That we didn't really need their approval, but we really wanted their blessing. So one of my great memories about Weber State was naming Weber State a university and allowing it to become a university. That was a red letter day.
Nolan represented Governor Leavitt on the Salt Lake Olympic Committee, serving as the chair of the Finance Committee. For 11 years, he has served as a member of the Board of Regents.
I was the chairman of the board when Ann Milner was selected as president of Weber State. And I think that's one of my finest decisions, not mine, our decision, the Regents. She's just proved to be an incredible president.
As co-chair of the community group Education First, Nolan is currently working toward improving education for all Utah students.
And then for higher education, we have subscribed to the goal that we need more people with skills that are needed out in the workforce. You'll hear a 66% number thrown around, and it's because some national studies have said that we have to have 66% of our population with either a certificate or a degree. And I'm quite convinced that we won't have a future as a state if we don't tackle that program.
Weber State University is honored to present the 2012 President's Award to Nolan Karras for his exemplary service and achievements.